We can now bring in our senior reporter, Catherine Norris-Trent. Catherine, great to see you as always. Some 30,000 people have been displaced in the aftermath of these floods. What are some of the immediate needs for survivors?
The needs are absolutely huge. I mean, as you can see on the scale of those pictures, the hunt is still on for survivors. They're still trying to move the rubble, overturn cars, dig into collapsed buildings. Time is running out, clearly. There's been a delay in getting rescue teams into the country and into the affected areas. They need to clear roads. It's a very complicated place to work in. Libya is a complicated country. Eastern Libya, all the more so. We know that, political divisions and make that especially difficult at times. There are tens of thousands of people displaced, as you said. They need food, shelter and water, because there is a real risk here of the water supply in these areas getting polluted, getting infected with basically the unburied dead bodies. Excuse me for being graphic about this, but this is a real risk going forward now, a huge health risk. They need to find the dead bodies and bury them. That's why we're seeing these mass graves. There is a shortage of body bags. They're appealing for more body bags so that they can prevent a secondary disaster here, disease and further deaths from, rotting corpses, really. They're still being washed up on the coastline. They're still being discovered everywhere. The scale of this is enormous, and so the humanitarian response, it's coming in now, but it needs to be enormous as well.
And the fact of the matter is we're hearing from the UN agencies that most of these deaths could have been avoided, and that tells us a lot about the state of the infrastructure in Libya.
It's incredibly, incredibly sad, isn't it? You saw the head of the UN World Meteorological Organization saying that if early warning systems and if emergency management systems had worked properly, most people could have survived if they'd been evacuated away from this valley where the dams broke and the water rushed through, the flood water, basically like a tsunami there. There were warnings put out about severe weather, but the evacuation, the order doesn't seem to have been transmitted speedily. It doesn't seem to have been carried out. There are so many issues in Libya. It's basically been a failed state since 2011, since the overthrow of Muammar Gaddafi. And there have been rival governments, there have been militias, armed groups in control. There's been a chronic lack of underfunding, of lack of maintenance, of public bridges, buildings, houses, dams, and this is what you're seeing here. I mean, people in the east of Libya, where I've travelled myself, would tell you even before 2011 that they were neglected by the government in the west of Libya, by Muammar Gaddafi in Tripoli, and that he wasn't funding things there. So there's perhaps decades of neglect going on here. But clearly, amid the very deteriorating security situation, there's been years of conflict, years of struggles between armed groups. It's just not been maintained. And so now there has been an announcement from Libya's Attorney General, who in theory, on paper at least, has authority in the east and in the west, saying should be a public inquiry, and that is being backed up by various politicians to try and find out what went on, because we knew that this dam, there were warnings from engineers that these dams were in a bad state. So there are calls for a public inquiry to see exactly who was to blame, what was to blame. Whether that public inquiry will ever take place is another thing. I mean, this is a place where it's dysfunctional, corruption is rife, and people a lot of the times are left to fend for themselves.
We'll see how people react, of course, those who've survived this tragedy. Thank you very much for that, Catherine Norris-Trent there.